Welcome to another episode of Mastering Cybersecurity, developed by baremetalcyber.com. Let's dive in. A maturity model is a structured way to describe how capable a program becomes as practices grow from basic to advanced, using clear levels that set expectations. Organizations use maturity models to make progress measurable, comparable, and repeatable across teams and suppliers. In cybersecurity, a maturity model helps translate broad principles into concrete behaviors, documented evidence, and predictable outcomes under real-world constraints. The approach matters because attackers exploit weak and inconsistent practices, especially across extended vendor ecosystems. A maturity model addresses that risk by defining staged requirements so foundational habits arrive first and stronger safeguards build on stable footing. When leaders, engineers, and auditors share the same staged language, decisions become easier to justify and results become easier to verify. The result is not perfection, but a reliable floor and a clear path upward. The Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, CMMC, applies that staged idea to protecting sensitive information in defense and related supply chains. At its core, the model sets specific practices and documentation standards that organizations must demonstrate through assessment and evidence, not assurances alone. The program focuses on protecting data that adversaries value, driving consistent behaviors across thousands of contractors and service providers. Although it originated for defense procurement, the staged approach benefits any organization that needs verifiable security from partners and internal teams. The model complements rather than replaces widely used control catalogs by turning them into tiered expectations and assessment methods. For beginners, the key is understanding that CMMC ties everyday tasks, records, and approvals to a maturity level that can be demonstrated credibly. The model evolved in response to years of data loss, uneven control adoption, and inconsistent attestations across complex supply chains. Earlier efforts emphasized contractual promises and scattered audits, which often failed to translate into sustained, checkable practices at the working level. Policymakers and program owners sought a path that balanced rigor with practicality, learning from feedback, pilot assessments, and industry capability gaps. Over time, the framework consolidated requirements, clarified scoping language, and aligned more tightly to existing standards to reduce duplication and confusion. The revisions also emphasized evidence quality, assessor consistency, and understandable pathways for small and mid-sized organizations. The outcome is a program that measures real behavior with clearer expectations while remaining anchored to familiar security principles. The current structure organizes controls into levels that build on each other, moving from foundational hygiene to more advanced, threat-resistant practices. Each higher level adds depth, formality, and coverage across systems, people, and processes that touch sensitive information. Foundational expectations center on straightforward safeguards that reduce common mistakes and obvious attack paths. Intermediate expectations bring in more formal planning, monitoring, and response habits that must be documented and repeatable. Advanced expectations emphasize resilience under realistic threats, stronger technical depth, and proven management oversight that binds the system together. Thinking in levels prevents skipping hard basics while still providing a destination for teams that can sustain more sophisticated defenses. The staircase is intentional, and every step supports the one above it. Scoping the environment begins with a plain inventory and a clear boundary around systems that handle the in-scope information. Teams identify data flows, repositories, user groups, and interfaces that touch the protected information, including endpoints, servers, and managed services. Many organizations create an enclave, which is a separated and well-documented segment where sensitive processing occurs under controlled rules. The boundary should name identity systems, administrative jump hosts, logging infrastructure, and any tool chains that reach into the enclave. External dependencies, such as cloud platforms or managed security providers, must be documented with contracts and inheritance statements. The goal is a defensible map that explains who touches what, where data moves, and which components require the model's practices and evidence. Assessments in the program vary by level and are designed to match risk and scalability across the supplier base. Lower levels may allow self-assessment with attestation by an authorized official, using standardized methods and retained evidence for verification. Higher levels generally require an independent review by a certified third-party assessment organization, C3PAO, with trained assessors who follow consistent procedures. The most sensitive situations may involve government-led assessments that apply additional rigor and oversight beyond industry channels. Regardless of type, assessors evaluate implementation and documentation, looking for repeatable behaviors and trustworthy records rather than one-time showpieces. The emphasis on evidence ensures results are reproducible and meaningful across organizations and over time. A practical gap assessment compares current practices against the target level and converts findings into a realistic plan. Teams review each requirement, mark current status, and note what evidence exists, where it lives, and who maintains it. Gaps are written clearly as a missing control or missing proof, which avoids confusion during remediation and assessment. Prioritization usually follows risk impact, effort, and dependency order, so foundational items that unblock others rise first. Each task receives an owner, a date, and an acceptance threshold, which prevents vague intentions and last-minute scrambles. The resulting roadmap becomes a living schedule that ties improvements to measurable outcomes and verifiable outcomes. Progress becomes visible because each step produces something concrete and reviewable. Common implementation themes recur across environments and map directly to familiar security domains. Access control ensures only authorized identities reach the enclave, using multi-factor authentication, role definitions, and periodic reviews that actually document removals and approvals. Incident response requires a plan, a trained team, and records of exercises, notifications, and post-incident actions that tie to tickets and dates. Secure configuration relies on baselines, change control, and hardened images, supported by evidence like configuration exports and signed approvals. Vulnerability management depends on scans, patch tracking, and risk-based remediation timelines with dated reports and change tickets to prove closure. These themes build a chain from intent to behavior to proof, which is exactly what maturity requires. The themes are simple to name and meaningful to demonstrate. Several pitfalls undermine progress, yet each has a practical fix when caught early and addressed directly. Scoping too broadly wastes resources on systems that never touch the protected information, while scoping too narrowly creates invisible attack paths and missing evidence. Confusing compliance with security leads to paper artifacts that do not reflect real behavior, which unravels quickly during interviews and sampling. Underestimating documentation needs delays assessments because otherwise sound practices cannot be proven consistently. Overlooking subcontractors and cloud inheritance leaves gaps where responsibilities should be contractually defined and operationally verified. The practical fix is a deliberate scoping pass, a documentation plan tied to operations, and explicit supplier evidence. Clarity on who provides which proof prevents surprises later. Sustaining maturity after an assessment means treating practices and evidence as ongoing habits rather than one-time events. Continuous monitoring keeps logs, scans, and alerts current, and it produces dated outputs that show timely action rather than retrospective reconstruction. Records of access reviews, training cycles, backups, and incident exercises should follow a published cadence with sign-offs that auditors can verify. When permitted, plan of action and milestones, POA and M, items must show movement toward closure, with compensating safeguards recorded and accepted consciously. Change management connects upgrades to risk evaluation and updated baselines, preserving the thread from decision to configuration to outcome. Preparing for reassessment becomes routine when artifacts are maintained in place and not assembled hurriedly. The system stays healthy because it is continuously exercised. The model also emphasizes governance because leadership behavior determines whether practices remain stable under pressure and competing priorities. Management should receive reports that summarize control health, key risks, and aging gaps in simple, comprehensible language that supports timely decisions. Budget planning must recognize that certain activities, like monitoring and patching, have steady costs that keep controls alive and evidence flowing. Vendor oversight needs explicit requirements, scheduled reviews, and contract clauses that bind inheritance and reporting to real performance. Workforce planning should account for training, role backfills, and cross-training so key controls do not depend on a single person. Governance closes the loop between technical work and organizational accountability, which is essential for sustained maturity. Without it, progress fades when attention shifts. Measurement keeps improvements honest, so programs benefit from practical metrics tied to actual behaviors and artifacts. Useful measures include time to revoke access after separation, percentage of systems on a hardened baseline, and median days to remediate high-risk vulnerabilities. Each metric should map to a requirement, have a clear data source, and drive a specific decision or follow-up. Dashboards are helpful when they aggregate from authoritative systems and preserve the audit trail back to tickets, approvals, and logs. Sampling methods should be defined so repeated checks produce consistent results that survive external scrutiny. When metrics reveal drifting performance, the response should update both operations and documentation to reflect reality. Measurement is powerful because it guides attention where it matters most. Culture and training transform checklists into habits, which is where maturity becomes visible in daily work. Staff benefit from short, role-specific materials that explain why a control exists, what evidence it produces, and how to recognize when to escalate. New hire onboarding should include the enclave's rules, data handling expectations, and where to find procedures and contact points. Periodic refreshers can use real tickets and anonymized incidents to connect policies with practical tasks and time pressures. Leaders reinforce culture when they praise good escalations, protect maintenance windows, and accept documented risk decisions rather than undocumented shortcuts. Training also covers suppliers who touch the boundary, making expectations explicit beyond the organization's walls. Culture turns requirements into reflexes that endure. When the program uses external services, inheritance must be deliberate and well documented to avoid gaps and double work. Cloud platforms, managed detection providers, and identity services can satisfy portions of requirements when their responsibilities, controls, and evidence are contractually defined. The consuming organization still needs to integrate logs, approve configurations, and verify reports so the inherited control remains effective within the enclave. Evidence should include service agreements, responsibility matrices, independent audit reports, and samples of alerts or tickets that show integration is real. Where an inherited control is partial, local compensation must be documented and tested so the overall requirement is fully met. Treating inheritance as a living relationship maintains clarity and reduces assessment friction. Clear boundaries create reliable outcomes. Finally, documentation practices should be streamlined so they support work rather than obstruct it during busy periods. Templates help teams write consistent policies, procedures, and diagrams that map directly to requirements, owners, and evidence locations. Version control and review dates keep documents accurate, while change logs allow auditors to see how the program adapted to new risks and technologies. Central repositories with access control reduce confusion and ensure the same authoritative copy is used in operations and assessments. Cross-references between the System Security Plan, SSP, procedures, and tickets help trace an action from policy through execution to results. When documentation mirrors real workflows and systems, the organization spends less energy translating and more energy improving. Good paperwork tells a true story. The maturity model ties everyday security habits to levels that can be demonstrated, repeated, and trusted across complex supply chains. By scoping carefully, mapping to established standards, producing clear evidence, and sustaining routines, organizations build security that others can verify without guesswork. The staircase of expectations makes progress visible and keeps attention on the basics while preparing for stronger defenses. That steady, evidence-driven approach reduces uncertainty, improves decisions, and turns security promises into outcomes that stand up over time. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.